Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Texas Energy Fund Outside of ERCOT Grant Program Project Reporting and Disbursement Requirements webinar. We're happy to see you all here, and as you may recall, my name is Lucas Martin. I am the Outside of ERCOT Program Lead for the Texas Energy Fund Administrator, and I'll be facilitating today's session, joined here with some members of the PUCT team, and namely Yvonne Mendoza from the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Yvonne, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute and introducing yourself for the call.
Hi, thank you, Lucas. My name is Yvonne Mendoza, and I oversee the Outside of ERCOT grant program of the Texas Energy Fund here at the PUCT. As we continue moving forward, we want to set clear expectations regarding the process and communicate the PUCT's dedication to being good stewards of the funds and also our commitment for mitigating risk to any of these taxpayer dollars. We have some good information at this webinar. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Yvonne. So with that, we'll jump into the agenda. As you can see here on the screen, the intention is to provide an overview or review of the OEGP post-award process and program lifecycle. We'll then dive into an overview of the reporting before going into details about the requirements for the four types of reports that'll need to be submitted. Next, we'll cover the disbursement request process, including touching on eligible and ineligible project costs and the required supporting documentation demonstrating eligibility. And we'll finish out by going through a couple of immediate next steps coming out of this session. So without further ado, we'll dive right in. Alrighty, so again, touching on the first segment here is just kind of an overview of the outside of ERCOT program life cycle, where we currently are and where we're heading. So you can see denoted in the red box, we have been working with you all to prepare and sign for grant agreement, meaning working through the project planning documents and the budget documents and the list of supporting documentation that we worked through in the webinars earlier this year, and working back and forth with you all to date. And then we are looking to spend some time today talking about the reporting and disbursement section of the life cycle here, talking about the reports, both quarterly and annually, as well as some of the ad hoc reports as well. It's important to note that as we move into this next stage, significantly more collaboration will be necessary within your organizations, within your entities. And where we've typically seen kind of a pivot between the key points of contact within organizations that now come to the forefront in working with us in, I'll say, gathering and providing supporting documentation. So I note that here at the jump to kind of one hint towards them being more involved later on and them participating in the process going forward. And in walking through the documentation, you'll kind of see just why. So I just wanted to highlight that here. And then we'll have additional sessions and discussions around the next stages around compliance and monitoring and project closeout at a later date. But with that, we'll maybe jump to just kind of the breakdown of the two different webinars we intend to hold. Obviously, the one today, spending some time talking about roles and responsibilities and requirements within reporting and disbursements. And then there'll be a separate webinar happening towards the end of June, specifically doing a click through of the Texas Energy Fund portal and where you can find the reports as well as the disbursement requests and how to upload and populate different fields for those disbursements as well as the reporting. Reason for breaking it up was at that point in time in June, it'll be closer to when you will actually be utilizing it for those functions. So that's the reason for the breakup of the two different sessions. Alrighty. With that, let's jump into just kind of an overview of the reporting within the Outside of ERCOT grant program. There are four reports that need to be submitted And you can see them here on the screen, them being the performance report, the financial report, the real property report, and the significant development report. These will all be, as I touched on earlier, submitted within the Texas Energy Fund portal, and the process for submission we'll go through in the next few slides. The performance and financial report, those reports are on an annual basis on a schedule that we'll explain in the next few slides here. But the real property report you can see is an annual report. And then lastly, the significant development report is more of an ad hoc report and is intended to be submitted when an entity or grantee realizes a significant development, either a major delay or hopefully some milestones coming sooner, but is a venue for you to provide that information that is impacting your projects and escalate for us to review and know moving forward as well. So. Without getting into too much of the details here on this slide, we'll maybe jump into to a double click of each of the reports here. So the quarterly report, the quarterly performance report is intended to capture progress against the plans that we've been working through for the better part of the last several months. So it shouldn't come as a significant surprise. It's just now you're reporting against those activities, milestones, and metrics that have been enumerated in the project plan document. So you can see here the information we're looking to gather from you all is the total completion kind of percentage, where you're at as it relates to those activities and milestones that again are enumerated in your project planning documents, as well as now or post execution within your grant agreement documents, where you're at related to the performance metrics, what you've completed this quarter, what you're planning to do next quarter. It is intended to be another venue for you to risk or escalate any potential risks and any mitigation plans that you're taking to mitigate those risks, as well as a venue to capture key personnel and scope issues, anything related to schedules and project schedule status. So a number of items here is kind of a non-exhaustive list of supporting documentation related to, I'll say, demonstrating progress against those things. So depending on the activity and milestone that are captured in your documents, we look to see different types of either supporting and sign off of records, field reports, inspection reports, photos and permits. Again, not to kind of go through all of them here, but you kind of get the sense of depending on the field or information that is within your report, we are looking for the supporting raw documents that would substantiate those metrics, milestones, personnel changes, or schedule issues, or anything like that. So this is intended to be one. Obviously, you can kind of see within the screen on the left is for fields to be populated within the Texas Energy Fund portal, but as well as the supporting documentation to substantiate it. What I do want to note here in the bottom left portion of the screen is that all supporting documentation, for whether it be for performance reports, for the financial reports, or the disbursement requests, all supporting documentation must be clearly legible. If it's not able to be reviewed by the team, we will have to send it back via RFI for you all to provide documents that are legible. With that, we'll move on to the financial report. What I didn't touch on the last screen, and I apologize for not doing it, was that this report, the financial report, as well as the performance report, opens on the first day of your assigned month and must be submitted no later than 21 days into your assigned month. I have another slide further in the deck here that we'll make sure to touch on that, but want to make sure that we reiterate that point a few different times as it relates to the due dates for these reports. But the financial report is just that it's capturing not so much on the project planning, but I'll say these two documents or these two reports kind of work hand in hand in that The performance report is tracking progress against those activities and milestones. The quarterly financial report is backing up that information with the costs associated with that activity. So the intention is to kind of have both at the same time and review against them accordingly. But the information here, again, much like the performance report, is built off of the documents that we're working with you all on right now, and it's built off of the budget document. Um, so we are looking to capture progress against the budget, where you're kind of sitting at as it relates to the budget. So those being kind of the OEGP expenditures, unobligated balances, a venue for you to escalate any budget issues, as well as it's intended to be kind of more forward looking. So updating any forecasts because in working with you all, understanding that all projects that are currently in the overall OEGP portfolio are all on a reimbursement basis. So the disbursement request avenue kind of captures a lot of what has happened previously. The quarterly financial report, while good information for past experiences as well, is intended to be kind of more forward-looking in that we're intending for you all to submit potential quotes, unpaid invoices, and purchase orders, any amended contracts that might have been previously shared, so any updates to those that would help provide supporting documentation justifying future activities. So this is just another venue for you to be providing that type of documentation, and we will look to that to make sure we have a strong understanding and appreciation for future obligations for your awards and for the overall project. So supporting documentation again will need to be clearly legible, but again it'll be those types of documents that are listed lying at the top there. And the last part here, again, because this is intended to be have a relationship to the disbursement requests process. We'll touch on some of the checklist items for the disbursement requests, but it's intended to be kind of same or similar information, but just another venue for more forward-looking activities. With that, we'll shift to the real property report. Separate from the other two, this one is an annual report. It'll become open September 1st and is due on the 30th of September. And this one is only for those applicants. I'll say most applicants and prospective grantees, and at some point grantees. I'm anticipating almost everyone having some of the projects touching on real property, but just want to have that caveat here that it's only for those grantees that have done work related to real property. So you can see here a lot of the information is around projects that have touched on land improvements, structures, or any legal interests impacting the land. So you can see a lot of that information is directly related to that. Description of the real property, the address of that property, the land or building area, the ownership type of the real property, the cost of it, the state interest as a percentage, and then just documentation demonstrating insurance coverage as well. So we have a little bit of that information here, and then kind of a non-exhaustive list at the bottom where we're looking to capture photos, deeds and liens, covenants, any potential blueprints, if there's a mortgage instrument involved, as well as insurance certification, again, demonstrating that you have adequate coverage. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but again, all documentation must be clearly legible, and if it's not, we will send an RFI requesting legible information. So or making sure to note that here as well. Lastly, as it relates to the reports anyway, is the significant development report. Obviously, intending or hoping for all of these projects to go off without a hitch and no issues or events of note. But if and when there are events that occur, this is the venue for you all to submit documentation as well as just information for us all, the PUCT to be aware of as it relates to any impacts or changes. So, for example, if something was planned for the first quarter of your project plan or of your project, and that'll occur in the third or fourth or fifth quarter, a year out, this would be the venue for you to provide that information for us to be one, aware of it, two, make any potential changes or plans to your project documents, whether it be within your grant agreement and your period of performance and so forth. But this is the venue for you all to provide that information. Um, I do want to speak a little bit on the second point on the right-hand side is that while there's no immediate deadline, obviously because these things are ad hoc and these things come up kind of sometimes unannounced. I do want to emphasize the need to reach out to your grant manager, not only for this report, for even for the other ones. If there's any issues that come up, we're always available and happy to provide guidance as it relates to any of the reports, but this one specifically, in that we all don't want you to have to submit a significant development report just because maybe a person on your staff might be out and you don't have adequate coverage for a few days or so forth. Some of those kind of more minor developments that may seem significant to you all in the moment might not need to be escalated through this channel. So I don't want to dissuade anyone from having to submit one, but just want to make sure that everyone is aware of what needs to be captured and what escalates to the need for a significant development report. So you can see a couple things here where we've noted just the type of information that will need to be provided, what type of event it is, the description of the event and the impact of it. Um, if it's a delay, kind of a description of a potential correction plan or any assistance that might be needed for you all from either the Texas Energy Fund or the Public Utility Commission as well. So you can see kind of a non-exhaustive list that's really dependent on the significant development. So if it is someone is leaving your office and they've been your point person for X, Y, or Z, and now you're going to be delayed, it could be an updated key personnel table. Could also just be some photo documentation of what occurred, whether it be I know a lot of flooding has occurred over the last 12 to 13 months, where if your project area has been kind of wiped out, or hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it does, this would be the venue for you to provide that documentation or information. I lost internet there for a second. I hope I still have everybody. Um, I hope I didn't lose you all for too long. But I had just walked through the significant development report and touched on the need or the types of documentation for demonstration of a significant development, and we were just shifting over to the cadence of the reporting and disbursements as it relates to assigned months within a quarter. I'm hoping that's where I think I lost everybody. If I can get a positive reaction from the other um, folks on the call.
We're
Yep.
still here. We're good.
Right, sweet. All right. We'll move on then to the reporting and disbursement cadence. I apologize for dropping off. Um, but as mentioned or touched on just um, briefly on a few slides previously, that the intention obviously is for these reports and disbursements to come in a quarterly basis. However, in order to kind of stagger the workflow and reviews and make sure that we are able to provide and kind of broad overall support, is the intention is to have three different groups within the months of a quarter. So you can see here, I'll spend a little bit of time on the green portion for group one. This follows a traditional quarterly cadence, kind of on a more 3 months out of the year. The first 3 months, meaning it follows the next 3 months and so forth. But you can see here for the reporting period is April 1st to June 30th. So in the report submission for or say following that window or following that period of time, you would submit the report demonstrating activities that have occurred throughout that period of time. So you have 21 days starting July 1st through July 21st, where you would be providing the information related to the activities that occurred April 1st through June 30th. Um, Similarly, and we haven't spent any time yet and we will in the next couple of slides as it pertains to the disbursement request submission window. July 1st, you would report on or provide supporting documentation and outline the costs that have been incurred and spent related to the activities that occurred April 1st to June 30th. Obviously, for those that have incurred pre-award costs utilizing that venue, you would provide all of the documentation that has occurred pre-award in your first disbursement request as well. So this is intended to kind of demonstrate just how things work on a quarterly basis, experienced by you all on a quarterly basis. But in the review process, we will be continuing to receive reports and disbursements kind of on a monthly basis as it pertains to the Texas Energy Fund specifically. But you can kind of get the gist on Group 2 then. It'll shift a month forward. It'll be May 1st to June 31st or through June 31st with the intention of the reports and the disbursement requests to come in August 1st for the reports, August 1st for the disbursements as well. And then in Group 3, again, moving forward one more month, June 1st through the end of August, with reports and disbursements coming in September for those. And you kind of get the gist there, but we will communicate the group assignments to each grantee individually before we get to grant agreement execution. And they will, you might have noted in your review of the grant agreement documents that there is a place for that information to be captured within the grant agreements as well. So they'll be enumerated in there, and happy to provide any questions or answers to any questions that you might have on that front. But we'll work with you all in making sure that you have adequate support throughout all of the months. Just noting here that the reports and disbursements will come through following this cadence here. Alrighty. Next, we'll pivot to waivers and amendments. I know I spoke a little bit about this and that some of the events that may come through in a significant development report or trigger the need for a significant development report also might warrant the need for a waiver or an amendment to your grant agreement. So noting here on the left-hand side, waiver is a request to suspend a specific requirement for a defined period of time. This could include, again, kind of a reporting requirement if there's an obstacle in submitting the financial performance or real property reports. It could also be addressing an administrative requirement like an issue with contract oversight or insurance coverage, but this is a waiver for a defined period. It wouldn't necessarily be or warrant to a waiver for the life of the grant or so forth, but those would be kind of escalated or brought into the amendment process, where an amendment is a request to change or add a term within your grant agreement. This could be a project scope change, change in period of performance, or a project budget. So that's where there's a clear distinction there that the amendment is obviously a bit of a more of a higher bar for the need for those, and a waiver could kind of come on a quarterly basis depending on the reports that you all are submitting. I do want to note here, kind of on the right side, is just the process overview, but also just want to make sure that I express that it's incumbent on you as grantees to proactively notify the Texas Energy Fund administrator, as well as just kind of your grant manager, if there's a need for a waiver or an amendment. This is a process that is built into the Texas Energy Fund portal. However, happy to always answer or try to answer questions that may come up as it pertains to the need for these waivers. So, want to just make sure that to note that you should reach out to your grant manager if the need arises for one of these, or if the perceived need for one of these comes up, and then we can work with you all in defining the path forward. I also do want to note here that uh, if there's a date or if there's a submission date that's been passed, um, we will reach out to you all to get a better sense of why a deadline may have been missed. Um, and we'll notify you of that. If there's an excessive number of missed deadlines or waivers and waivers that need to be subsequently submitted, you can anticipate additional monitoring to make sure that you all can meet those deadlines. And if the perception is there that you're not meeting those deadlines, there could be additional site visits or virtual desk visits to hopefully help in remediating the excessive number of those waivers or potential amendments, and just making sure we're not missing the deadline. So the information on the process will be determined by the severity of the request. Again, just mentioning that if things escalate for the need for an amendment, we'll work with you all to do that. I'll say the information on the bottom right-hand side or bottom side anyway is a little bit dependent on the type of waiver or amendment that'll be needed. So there it kind of runs the gambit here on what types of information will be needed, but do anticipate if it's a change to a project scope or a period of performance that the documentation that we've been working through with you all for the last several months will need to be updated to reflect that. And then they'll need to have supporting documentation to justify the need or the shift for those things. So just want to make sure that we note that as well. Um, with that, I think we can move on to the report review process. So kind of going back to the reports. Obviously, they'll be submitted by you all within the 21 days, the first 21 days of your assigned month that we touched on. We'll review those reports. You can anticipate if we have any questions that an RFI will come within 10 days of the receipt, within 10 business days of the receipt of those reports. And then following the process that we've been utilizing to date, and specifically more on the application side, that you'll kind of have 5 days to remediate any of those issues or provide any of the supporting documentation regarding the RFI that was sent. And then if there's no other information or no other issues noted, that there will be an approval that'll be noted through the Texas Energy Fund portal coming from the PUCT post their review of those reports. And that's for the financial report and the performance report, as well as those other reports as well. But the significant development report, I do want to note here that that one might take a little bit different route, in that if it's needed for a waiver or an amendment, that you can anticipate some additional back and forth occurring. Alrighty, so I know I've spoken a little bit about the disbursement request process, and now here to spend a little bit more time, a little more in-depth information regarding that process. So, similar to the what I noted earlier, in that the performance and financial reports are all built off of the documentation we've been working through with you all for the last several months. The disbursement process and budgets are all built off the budget templates that we've been working through with you all the last several months as well. So the plan is for those budgets that you will incur costs and pay for expenses against those budgets related to your projects. The grantee, you all will be paying the invoices and retaining the documentation related to those expenditures. And then you will provide that supporting documentation in through the portal. Again, legible information, legible supporting documentation for us to review. And then if there's any additional RFIs that need to go back and forth, remediating any of those issues, and then anticipating receiving grant payment for approved expenses. I do want to note here the second bullet on the bottom right is that the following Texas grants management standards, um, that those costs or would anticipate being reimbursed 30 days after receiving a complete reimbursement request. And I just want to emphasize the complete reimbursement request, and that if there's an additional RFI that needs to remediate or resolve any of the issues that we've noted in our reviews, it will restart that clock. So after your RFI has been, you've responded to the RFI and you provided the supporting documentation that we may have requested, that's when the 30 days starts. It isn't from when you, if there's issues, it isn't from your initial submission. It's from when you responded to that RFI. We'll spend the next couple of slides talking about Texas, we'll say grants management standards, reasonability, allocability, necessary and eligible, allowable expenditures. But do want to note here that we have kind of a checklist on the left-hand side as it relates to including invoices, receipts, and proof of payment, purchase orders, specifically around the supporting documentation. But want to spend a little bit more time here as we pivot to the next slide as it relates to cost principles. So I mentioned reasonable, allocable, necessary, and allowable, but I want to spend just a second here because I know we've been working with a lot of grantees or prospective grantees for the last few months, and do recognize that there are a number of costs that are related, either directly or somewhat indirectly related to project execution. Can note a number of those kind of on the right-hand side of the bottom part of the screen here, whether it's food and lodging, travel expenditures, maybe even general use vehicles that you can make a case are related to the project and the project execution. However, I'll say the charge of the Texas Energy Fund broadly and the outside of ERCOT program specifically is to utilize the funds for modernization of infrastructure, weatherization, reliability, resilience enhancements, and then vegetation management. That being said, our focus is on eligible costs specifically related to those cost categories within the budgets that we've all been working with you all on. And so you can kind of see on the left-hand side that those are kind of the examples of eligible costs. Noting there are a number of indirect costs that are related to projects and getting them executed. But the charge of this program is to focus on enhancements to infrastructure and those things. So just want to note that that's the lens in which the reviews will be happening. And they'll also be based on, as I mentioned on the previous slide, what is already captured in your budget. Those will be kind of the two driving factors for the better part of the reviews for disbursements moving forward. So if they aren't captured in your budget, you can kind of anticipate it'll be a hard hill for you all to climb and provide or in justifying the need for the expenditure. So you can look to capture or look to submit some additional supporting documentation justifying the need for it. But I will say if it's not captured in your budget and not directly related to the things that is touched on, that it's going to be a hard hill for you all for anyone to climb for those costs to be recouped and reimbursed. So, and also noting the four things at the very top, those being the costs need to be reasonable, kind of generally allocable, necessary for execution, and allowable under Texas grants management standards. Alrighty. With that and spending just a little bit more time talking about supporting documentation. Again, noting that I'll say the eligible project cost categories kind of tie directly back to the budget documents that we've been working through with you all. And the supporting documentation noted on the right-hand side tie back to those things. So if your eligible project costs are related to real property, we would anticipate receiving purchase agreements, appraisals, title documents, closing statements, a proof of payment. Again, this is being generally a broadly reimbursement-based program, so you look to see a proof of payment. Again, any insurance coverage and board approvals for that real property. I won't go through line by line, but I think you kind of get the gist in that there's the intention is for you all to provide a lot of supporting documentation, and mostly noting for at least in the reimburse or in the disbursement request process, all of it needs to be paid already for us to be able to reimburse those costs that have been incurred by you all. Lastly, on kind of the bottom portion of this table, I know it's been a topic of conversation with a number of you all in getting to this stage of the process, in that during the disbursement request um, process, this is kind of the last stage to kind of just memorialize some of those procurement documents that have been retained by you all to date. Understanding that there's a number of folks that have already procured contractors as it relates to labor or as it pertains to materials related to the projects, but this is kind of the final place for you all to just again memorialize and provide that documentation that may have already been provided in other venues and getting either getting to grant agreement stage or getting kind of to where you are now. But this is intended to be kind of the last place for you all to provide that documentation related to costs incurred for contractual personal services or contractual equipment and supplies and so forth. So do want to note here that that's the intention for this procurement documentation. Should not be the first stage. What we don't want to happen is for you all to have procured a vendor, and then you get to the disbursement request process and you've incurred millions of dollars with that vendor, and now we tell you you didn't follow proper procurement steps and none of those costs will be eligible. That's not what we want to happen at all. So want to make sure that those steps are followed on the beginning of the stage, and that this is just intended to be the last stage for y'all to memorialize that. Again, just noting here in the bottom part here is all supporting documentation must be clearly legible. Alrighty, moving now to the review process. I'll say, as mentioned earlier, kind of a shorter window for you all to provide that documentation, and that you have 10 days, the first 10 days of your assigned month to submit that supporting documentation. The review by the Texas Energy Fund will happen within 10 business days of receipt of it. So you can anticipate that if there's an RFI to remediate any issues, that that notification will be sent to you all within 10 days of receipt of the documents and receipt of their disbursement request. And then again, following the same process, you'll have 5 days to respond and provide either supporting documentation or whatever the RFI entails to remediate the issue. As mentioned earlier, the intention is to get funds out the door to you all 30 days after a completed submission. Again, completed meaning the last submission, meaning if you had to respond to an RFI, that would be when the 30 days starts on that front. With that, we come to the end of the disbursement requirements section of the webinar. And now we'll shift to kind of just highlighting some resources and next steps. So understanding that we've probably received some questions throughout this session, as well as kind of leading up to it, and try to weave the responses to those questions into the content overall. But do anticipate that we will be updating the FAQs to provide responses to those questions we've received, as well as others. So we'll be making updates there. We'll also be making updates to the post-selection and award program manuals, and we'll be providing those links to that updated information to you all directly. And then lastly, we'll be providing a link to the webinar recording that we're having right now. So look out for that information that'll be coming over to you all in the coming days. Next steps. So we'll be working through the next couple days and weeks trying to get to obviously grant agreement execution. So do anticipate a us, I'll say us, meaning the Texas Energy Fund Administrator, kind of leaning in more along with the PUCT to try to get your documents kind of final. As well as I know a few of you have already hosted the PUCT staff members on site. So do anticipate, if you haven't already, be working with the PUCT to get those scheduled so the PUCT can be on site and kind of see the locations and everything of the projects that they will be working with you all for the better part of the next few years potentially. So um, after the hosting of that, do anticipate signing grant agreements that'll be happening throughout the month of May and into and through June. And there'll be some coordination happening between you all and the grant managers to make sure the scheduling can work with you all and with the PUCT. And do note that the intention is for it to be an in-person session hosted at the PUCT office here in Austin, Texas, with Executive Director Connie Corona. Don't anticipate it being a long ceremony by any means, but it'll be a 30-minute session for the grant agreement signing as well. And then post execution, we will be looking forward to kind of coordinating different check-ins on a monthly or quarterly basis, dependent on the length of your projects. So do anticipate some emails coming forward regarding the scheduling of that. And then, as mentioned earlier in the session, that there will be another training specifically related to how you should be populating fields and supporting or providing supporting documentation through the Texas Energy Fund portal. Do want to make sure that I reemphasize the point I made earlier. If there's other folks that'll be part of execution, specifically in the portal, make sure that they are part of that session so you have proper coverage there. As well as feel free to forward the recording of this webinar to those folks as well. And then lastly, reporting and disbursements will happen. Will start in July for those folks that are part of kind of the assigned group one, and then in August for the assigned group two, and then September for assigned group three. I think that's the right way in which the calendar works. So I just want to make sure I was mentioning that right. But as always, if there's any questions throughout this process, feel free to escalate those through the OEGP at txenergyfund.texas.gov. We're happy to respond and provide any guidance through that venue. But appreciate you all being on the call today, and we're looking forward to continued engagement. Thanks, everybody.